I love a good origin story. Bitten by a radioactive spider and learned power and responsibility. Taught yourself a TV show theme song on the piano and grew into a musical legend. No matter what we do, there's a path that got us there. And that backstory always fascinates me. This week, ahead of the Thunder's game at Minnesota on Saturday, Minnehaha Academy in Minneapolis will hold a Friday night ceremony to retire Chet Holmgren's high school jersey. And that seemed like as good a time as any to delve into Chet's origin story. I mean, think about it. Here's a 7'1" kid who's built unlike any elite basketball player in the world, and he turned into a teenage celebrity on the hoop circuit. That is the stuff of high school legend. There are bound to be some stories. And in Minnesota, nobody tells a story like Chip Scoggins. The award-winning columnist at the Minneapolis Star Tribune has covered the Wolves, Vikings, Wild, and Gophers, but he also has the pulse of the city's booming high school basketball scene. And he has memories of the first time he saw that skinny kid from Minnehaha blocking everybody's shot. Today, we're telling Chet Holmgren's origin story with Chip Scoggins. I'm Brett Dawson, and this is Heard Thundering. Before we get started, a big thank you to the sponsors who support the show: MidFirst Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Fire Lake Casino, and your local Ford dealers. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. All right, so with that, let's welcome in Chip Scoggins from the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. Chip, first, before we get started, congratulations. The National Sports Media Association named you Minnesota Sports Writer of the Year yesterday, which I think is the fourth time you've won that.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. I appreciate it. It's there's a lot of great sports writers up here in Minnesota, so it's definitely an honor to be recognized with that group. Our
own Garen Emig won that award for Oklahoma, so shouts to Garen. We are very excited for him. So, Chip, Friday, Minnehaha Academy is going to retire Chet Holmgren's jersey, which is quite an honor when you're like 21 years old or whatever to get your jersey retired. And it got me thinking a little bit about, I'm always interested in sort of origin stories. And so Sure. I'm interested in Chet, since everybody's sort of fascinated with him here in Oklahoma City. And so first, I guess we'll start in the right now without asking you to speak for an entire city, an entire community. How do people there feel about Chet Holmgren, or what's the sense you have of how people feel about Chet?
Yeah, he became a very popular player here. This is a great basketball market. As bad as the Timberwolves have been historically, it's still and for all we talk about this being a hockey market, it is a very strong basketball market. Not just pro, not just college, but high school. High school basketball is very good in the state of Minnesota. And you look at the number of high-level players it has produced, I think it speaks to that. And so people are very aware of when star high school athletes are here, when they're playing, they follow their career. Tyus Jones, Jalen Suggs, you can go down the list. Matthew Hurt, who went to Duke. So people paid attention to Chet. And obviously the way that his body structure is and the way that he plays made him a kind of fascinating character for people to watch. And he has a great personality about him. So I would say he's, even though he didn't, play college here, people follow his career as he went to Gonzaga and then obviously now in the NBA.
Did he, he's one of those guys, obviously you talked about the body type and some of the personality stuff. And I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, where players would kind of become, there was always word of mouth before you saw a guy. People would say, oh, you got to get over to Ballard and check out this kid, or you got to get over to, Mail and see this kid play. Was he one of those guys where there was
Yes.
oh, you won't believe the Holmgren kid?
100%. That's what it was. It started word of mouth, and that's how I first saw him. I had heard about him, but I went to watch Minnehaha play, quite honestly, because I was doing a column on Jalen Suggs, his teammate who was a year older, and I think people know who Jalen is. Star at Gonzaga in the NCAA tournament with the shot, lottery pick. And so I was doing a column on Jalen, and I'd heard about Chet, but hadn't seen him play. And Brett, there was early in the game, he grabs a rebound. He's a 7 foot slender kid, long arms, unique body. And I see him go up and grab a rebound high above the rim, comes down on the fast break. He's leading the fast break. He puts it behind his back in open court to elude a defender, puts it through his legs on the dribble and pulls up and shoots an NBA three and drains it. And I remember thinking, what in the world? I had never seen anything like this. Never seen a player like him. He played the game like a point guard, like a guard. Some of the things he did as a 7-footer with a 7'4" wingspan. And it just, when you watched him play and the skills that he had and the way he handled the ball and the way he shot it. And then obviously it was fun to watch him play defense because quite honestly, it felt like he could average 15 blocks a game because kids just, with his long arms and wingspan, and he could block shots, 4 on one possession. He was a type of player that you just had never seen. And so I think people, that team, when you have Jalen Suggs and him, people are going to go watch them anyways, just because that's a super talented team. But I think people went to watch just to kind of see what all the buzz was about.
Yeah. I think I've read the story you wrote from the first time you saw him. And I think when you talked to him, he told you, like, he had basically just been a guard. Like, this wasn't a thing where he had to learn to play out on the perimeter. He was just, at that time, when he was a sophomore, kind of just learning to play in the post, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's almost like reverse engineering, right? His youth coach was Larry Suggs, Jalen's dad, and Larry coached a lot of kids coming up. And Larry recognized back then when Chet was in third grade that basketball was changing to this positionless idea that there are no positions. Everybody can handle ball, everybody can shoot. And so what he would do way back when Chet was in third grade, he would, at practices, he would put Chet on a hoop by himself and he would form shoot. He would work on his shot. And so his development worked backwards. He started out working as a guard and working on his skills and working on his shot, and then worked inwards until when I did that column, I think Chet was a sophomore, and he had just in the couple years previous, maybe his freshman year, really started working on his post game, post moves, back to the basket, and so he worked out in, and so he kind of grew up with that mindset of. I remember asking him, I was like, "What position would you say you play?" And he says, "Whatever they need me to play." Yeah. And I said, "What do you think people would say after watching you play and seeing your size, what position you play?" And he said, "I don't think they know what I do or what I am." So he was always kind of outside the box with his skill set and with just that the wingspan. And that was always something too. As he got older in high school, and you saw that, okay, he's probably going to be a one and done college player. And you looked at his frame, and he's never going to be a massive strength guy, right? But he plays strong and big, right? You've seen it a lot. People say, "Well, how's he going to hold up in the NBA with his lack of weight, his lack of size, muscle?" And I always said, "Look at his wingspan. Yeah. Look at the way he alters shots." And the other thing is, hey, they have to guard him. Big guys have to guard him on the floor, and he's so used to being out on the floor, handling the ball, shooting it, that he's going to be a matchup nightmare for bigs trying to guard him.
It's so interesting you say. I wonder about him when he was younger because I covered Anthony Davis at Kentucky. I was on the beat there, and AD had really wide shoulders, and so you could see that could change. His physique could change over time. Chet is not like that at all. He's kind of straight up and down. His shoulders are not wide, even though his arms are so long. And I just wonder, was that what he looked like even then? Was he just a kind of a straight up and down looking kid?
Yeah, there was no broad shoulders him. It was straight. But the thing you just saw that you knew. I mean, how many times in a game is somebody just going to back you down and overpower you? That just doesn't. Basketball is not really built that way anymore. And he understands how to use his body, particularly with his wingspan, to block shots, to affect shots, to crowd passing lanes. He knows how to use his gifts, and he's never going to be a Incredible Hulk, but with that wingspan, he just impacts. And at the high school level, it was almost comical compared to the NBA where guys are obviously so much bigger. But at the high school level, when you would see 6-foot guards go in there and try to do these high arcing floaters, and they could not get it over him because he was just wingspan. It would just go, kept going higher. So no, he built basically the same. Obviously, he's put on some weight and muscles from his high
Right.
school days through the strength training in college and the NBA. But how he's built now is kind of the same structure as he was in high school.
Did he have like the thing that really has struck me about him? And I knew a little about him. I know some people who know a lot of people at Gonzaga, and I had heard some talk about him before he got here and talked to various people. But one of the things that really stands out to people here is he does have this attitude. He's got a little bit of I don't know if swagger's the word. One guy told me he's got a lot of FU in him, you know, that he doesn't back down from anybody. He's not afraid of anybody. He's really confident. Was that his personality even then?
100%. 100%. You could see that he didn't take any on the court, right? And he didn't. You're not going to bully him. You're not going to look at him and say, "Oh, this guy doesn't weigh much." Or, we'll just bully him. It's not going to work because you're not going to. He has a fierce competitiveness about him. I mean, you just see the way he plays, and he doesn't back down. And so he had that from early on when he was 15, 16 years old. You saw, and he would show personality on the floor. Both him and Jalen Suggs. I mean, that team, they would get under the skin of opposing fan bases. It'd be fun, the student sections would come out and try to get on them and get them rattled, and you just weren't going to get it. They would kind of give it back to him. So he showed personality, but also very, very tough-minded. And the word you use, swagger, that's 100% right.
I wonder about that team a little bit because I was I had a very brief window recently where I covered Louisville basketball, and they had Percy Miller there as a walk-on, who's one of Master P's sons. Yep. Percy Miller, one of the sons who was on that team. So you had two sons of a really famous rapper. You had these future NBA lottery picks. And even, as you said, Minnesota and Minneapolis in particular have had some really good high school teams. That is a little different from your average high school team. I just wonder what the vibe around that team, what the scene around them was like.
Yeah, it was a traveling circus. I mean, it was people would come just to watch them play. And I don't think, if I'm correct, I don't think they went undefeated. I think they had a loss or two. But I remember my son's high school, they had one of those Christmas tournaments where you have 3 or 4 games in a day. And I remember going to watch them play. They played before my son's high school team played, and the gym was packed. I mean, people were coming on the baseline. And you know how it is now when you have high-level recruits, all the videographers for the different websites that come, they followed that team around looking for dunks, looking for Chet highlights, looking for Jalen highlights. So you couldn't go to their game and not see a handful of those photographers just there trying to get the clips of their dunks and their blocks or their 3-point. So it was it had a little bit of celebrity atmosphere to it, and they were good. They were fun. I mean, it was when they were playing at their best. I mean, you think about it, you had 2 lottery picks on a high school team, and the Miller kid could really score and shoot too. So they scored a lot, and they drew a big audience here.
You mentioned the talent. I looked this up yesterday. There are 12 Minnesotans currently, a lot more historically, 12 currently in the NBA. One of them, Amir Coffey, played at Minnesota. So none of these other guys. When those guys, Jalen and Chet, and I've never talked to, I talked to Jalen the other day, but not about this. When they were going through the process, how much hope was there in the city that they'd end up there? Is there any, lingering bitterness that they didn't, or was it a thing where Minnesota was in a place where you knew you weren't getting those players?
That's how it is. And this has been it's kind of become a common theme. And you look at how much the Gophers program has struggled traditionally. I mean, it just has not been a winning program. And so they're not beating Duke for a top 5 kid. They're not beating, and there's been a line of Tyus Jones, Matthew Hurd, Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren. They all leave. And I don't think people, they don't hold it against them, and they don't really hold out hope. They might, in fantasy land, think, man, wouldn't it be great if Tyus Jones stayed home and played, or Chet Holmgren stayed home and played? But they also realize these guys are going to be one and done. You're just not going to beat the blue bloods for those type of players. And so I don't think there's any real drama in the recruiting. It's just
Mm-hmm.
whether they're going to stay home here. I think people just automatically assume that they were going to go elsewhere to, one of the elite programs.
Right. The other thing that's interesting to me now is Chet is here. He is a rookie in the NBA, and the team that his team is chasing in the standings, the Thunder are a really highly competitive team for the first time in a few years, and the team they're chasing is the Timberwolves. And so, I wonder if there's a little bit of I don't know if animosity. Can you still love your local legend and hope Rudy Gobert blocks every one of his shots?
Yeah, I think Chet would probably get some cheers. I would think. I would hope. I don't think there's any hard feelings that he didn't stay and go to Minnesota. And but it's been a fun, rejuvenated season for the Wolves because, man, did they go through some dark days, and they've had some really, really low moments as an organization. And to see it all kind of this plan come together with the Rudy Gobert trade last year that looked like a disaster. Obviously, looking in hindsight now, they didn't play enough. He didn't get a chance to play with Cat enough because Cat missed, 60 games with an injury. And so they're a talented team. They're fun. I think that's going to be a great kind of back and forth with those two teams coming down the spring here. Two super dynamic teams with some great talent on it, young talent. And so it'll be fun. And I'm glad they're doing this for Chet here. And I'm sure it'll be a memorable night for him over there. That's such a cool thing. Like you mentioned, you're 21 and you get your jersey retired. But that speaks to also just the impact he had, not only in that program, specifically on that program, but also the impact he had on Minnesota basketball, the high school level. Because, like I said at the start, people really pay attention to high school basketball here. If you have great talent, they really do. And I think people appreciate what Chet has done and really developed and become a guy who, rookie of the year candidate and just really excelling as a rookie. I think people take pride in that.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Jalen went through this last year. He had this same ceremony at Minnehaha and said, he would tell Chet, just, enjoy it, savor it. He got to be there with his whole family, that kind of thing. Do those two guys, they're very closely connected. I know, they went to the same school. Jalen told us a story the other day about, meeting Chet when he was a gangly third grader, I guess. And he had these big feet. He wasn't any taller than anybody else, but he had these big feet. He could barely run around, and he's wearing cargo shorts. Are those two guys? Does that connection mean something to people there?
Yeah, and because you think about how long they've known each other and played together, and the fact that Larry Suggs, Jalen's dad, was their first coach, and really, I think if you talk to Chet, would sing his praises in terms of how he developed him as a player, and really goes back to the roots about, you look at his skill set, he'll thank Larry Suggs for that. And so, and just that was a special combination. When you have those two 1-2 punch, just the atmospheres they created, the big games they played in, they're always, teams wanted to knock them off because, heck, if you beat Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren, that's a big deal, right? I mean, two guys that are going to play in the NBA for a long time. And so I think they're forever connected because of how long they played together and how well they became known, and just, these two lottery picks that are on the same team. So, I think, and they're just good friends too. And I think if you get to know them, when you talk to those two guys individually, they're good guys, right? They're fun to talk to. They got great personalities. So, they're a good ambassador for Minnesota basketball.
Yeah, the Thunder is known for taking a little of the personality out, of trying to find ways to I don't want to say stifle it, but I think people have seen, for better and worse, they've seen sides of Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook after they left that they didn't see here. But Chet will get these moments, and there's even these moments where he kind of smiles and he wants to say something and he doesn't. And even when sometimes he doesn't have the filter, and he does have he's got a different kind of sense of humor than a lot of guys I've been around in basketball, because he's really dry.
It's sarcastic.
He's pretty understated. Yeah.
His humor is kind of right up my alley because it's very understated, right? It's very dry humor. And let's be honest, I think a lot of people are fascinating him because of the way he's built. right? Because you just haven't seen a player look like him, that skinny, and be that dominant, and dribble down the court and pull up and shoot, pull up through. You think traditionally those guys are back. You don't see him that skinny, but a guy that big is back to the basket. And I think just the way he plays and his body type makes him kind of this endearing character to watch. At least that's how I've always, like you said, like people's like, you got to go see this tall, skinny kid for Minnehaha who's doing these crazy things, and people would go watch him. So I think that was kind of one of the hooks. And then you saw how talented he is. You're like, man, we just haven't seen a guy like this before.
Yeah, it's really interesting that he's worked with Durant, because Durant was the last guy who, I mean, Anthony Davis was like this to a certain extent, but he never played on the perimeter quite like these guys do. But Durant was like that, where people said, well, how's he going to play? He's so skinny.
Yeah.
And he famously couldn't do the 185-pound bench press one time at the combine. And people said, oh, he's not strong enough and he's not skinny enough. And he just had all this skill. It's fascinating to me that he and Chet are working together some off the, on the court in the summers to develop some of those skills.
Yeah. And when people always said that to me, like, strength, size, I'm like, watch him play. Like, just watch him play. I mean, he's playing on the summer circuit, he's playing against the best players in high basketball and dominating, not just kind of getting by. He's dominating. He's dominated every level he's been at. I mean, just watch him play. I don't care what he weighs or how much he can bench press. You watch him play, and the guy's really talented, and he has just a unique skill set. So I always felt like that's going to translate. And he has the right temperament, the right competitiveness, the right I'm not going to back down mindset that is always going to allow him to thrive.
Yeah, he's been, it's been an interesting thing. He's been much better, not in every game, but by and large, he's been better the second time he's seen guys. He looked completely lost the first game he played against Nikola Jokic, has looked dramatically better since then, and they've won 2 games in Denver. I thought he looked pretty uncomfortable against Gobert the first time in Minnesota, looked much better here in OKC. He is that's the other thing people say about him, right, is that he's just driven. He's just hyper competitive and also really studious. He's a guy who goes back and looks at what he didn't do right and goes and fixes it. He seems like a very he's a baller. He's one of those guys who's just really into the game. Yeah,
I think you hit a thing. I think he's incredibly smart and adaptable. Like if a guy and rookies are going to go through that. I mean, it's not like he's going to come in there and just dominate every guy in the NBA. He's going to take his lumps too, and darn well NBA players are going to try to give him those lumps, right? They're going to try to go at him and test him and see what he can do. So he's going to get challenged. But I like that what you just said, that the second time through, he figures things out a little bit more, right? How to guard a guy, how to go against him on offense, what he needs to do. So I think he's a very smart player. I think he's adaptable. And I always think he will find a way to figure out what he needs to do to be successful.
I think, it's interesting, the thing you said about testing him, because I do think there is some of that. You see the way guys celebrate when they dunk on him. Obviously, anytime you dunk on a guy that tall, it would be Wembanyama is kind of the same way.
Sure.
But I also think there is an interesting level of, before Chet got in the league, you had like Patrick Beverley was saying he would take Chet over Victor Wembanyama because of the edge. And I think the way he grew up playing with Jalen, having his dad coach him, playing against really elite competition in high school, but also like he's just got this. There's an edge about him that's a little different. As somebody said to me, he didn't go to Duke, and that seemed notable that he didn't go to Duke. There's like he's kind of a guy who does his own thing. He is a guy. It feels like players have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, and his dad was a player, and so he grew up learning the game from his dad. I think. And I don't know where the competitiveness comes from. Is that just something, in that family? If that's just how he's always been wired? I noticed it, again, from the first time I saw him that sophomore year in high school. You could just see it, not only the skill and everything else, the physical part, but you could see, man, this guy is tough, right? He wants to go at you. So, I think NBA players, they respect guys that can play, guys that work hard, and guys that don't back down, right? Now, they're going to try to challenge you, and I'm guessing every night guys are going to try to challenge them. Yeah, it'd be kind of cool to dunk on whoever, but I think there is that respect because NBA players, they see this guy's game. They're like, man, this guy, you may look at his body size and think one thing, but then when you play against him, you're like, how could you not have respect for how hard he plays and the way he plays and his competitive drive?
Yeah, the other thing I think is interesting is that he's taken this all pretty well. He's, Mark Daigneault said he's got a good temperament for a long season. That's the thing they say around here about Gilgeous-Alexander all the time.
Sure.
He got asked, I don't know if you saw the other day when I think Tim McMahon from ESPN was in, and he was asking Chet some questions, and he said, what do you think you've proven? And to this point, what have you learned? What have you proven? And Chet said, I played 30 games. I haven't proven bleep. And I think that's pretty much in keeping with what I've learned about him so far.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah, I mean, you got to think he's been in a spotlight for a basketball spotlight his whole career, basically, right? High school he was, college he was. And so I don't think he's going to get, caught up in the buzz that he might have created, the talk that people were saying about him in his rookie year. He's a level-headed kid, and you spent time around him. You mentioned, his sense of humor. He's very grounded, right? His personality. And so I think he's kind of used to being in this fishbowl. He's used to being having people say good things about him. And I don't think it kind of just washes over him. He's not going to pay attention to that. He's going to continue to kind of do his thing and work hard and keep it all in perspective.
Does he have a game? Did he have a game in high school or like a moment? Is there like a moment that's like, oh, that's the Chet play?
Boy, I'm sure there were. And it's funny. I mentioned off the top, the play that I saw him, the first time I saw him, the offensive, but the times I saw him, and I probably saw him in person 10, 12 times, between just regular season games, state tournament stuff. To me, it was always what he did on the defensive end, where he would block, swat a shot, a guy would get it, they come back in, swat it again. He would have like 3 blocks in one possession, and the crowd's going crazy and oohing and on because the team can't get a shot to the rim because he just keeps blocking. I can't remember the specific thing, but I know I saw it several times where he would have those games where he was almost more impactful, or not almost, he was more impactful on the defensive end because teams were so intimidated to drive into the hoop to get anywhere near the basket because they know the shot was going back the other way. So he would impact game. He could score 0 points and have a major impact because teams just, as good as the talent is here, there's not many high school kids that contend with his length and size when you're going in there. And so it was always, to me, I loved watching him play defense and watching the way he altered games.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned covering Anthony Davis at Kentucky. He had a really bad offensive game in the national championship game. And it's like part of his legend is telling the team at halftime, I can't make anything. So you guys just go get the points and I'll stop them from scoring. And that's essentially what he did. He just dominated the game. He was most outstanding player of the Final Four without really having an offensive game. What that reminds me of is that Chet is averaging almost 18 points a game.
Yeah.
He's shooting 38% from 3. And I think that the thought, and this is certainly my thought too, was that he'd come in pretty ready to defend in the NBA. Are you surprised at all he's a really high-level offensive player this year?
No, because I think, to me, like I said earlier, who do you match up with him on? And because he can shoot it so well, and because he has such great awareness. And the other thing I always was impressed with is he was a great passer. Like he could find open guys who would make these kind of crazy passes. You're like, man. But I just thought his skill level was so advanced in the way he could shoot it and ball handle it. And the comfort he has with playing on offense, this is not anything new to him. This, like, shooting threes and handling the ball and bringing it up and being a primary guy with the ball, that's nothing. He's done that since he was a young high school, a teenager. And so I thought that would be something that he would be able to do right away because he's a tough matchup for bigs. And, if you try to go smaller on him, he can handle that too. So that part I think he's just so skilled and so uniquely skilled. I thought he would translate right away.
That's interesting. The thing I think we talked a little about his work ethic. He came into the league with this spin move, and then you saw teams start to sit on it, and they try to strip the ball away. He's so tall, and tall guys in the NBA, you can't keep your dribble low enough, and so how are you going to keep from turning it over? And yet, he's now got a counter to that spin move. He can spin the other way. He's getting into a spot where he can shoot a dribble pull up or a little bit of a floater. Like, he's added quite a lot to his game in a rookie year, which bodes pretty well for what he might do down the road.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you start from a place of a foundation of he has really good skill, right? Then you can add bits and pieces, and the great players do that every offseason. They figure out, okay, how did teams adjust to me and start guard me? Okay, this offseason I'm going to work on this. I'm going to do a baseline fadeaway. I'm going to add the pull up. I'm going to do add this one thing, and I guarantee that's something when he goes away in the offseason, he'll come back with something new because he's got the foundation of being really high level skill and the work ethic. He'll put it in because he lives in the gym, and he's you can't be a good NBA player if you don't live in the gym, and so he has that part. But I just think when you start from the starting point of the skill level that he has, that he brought to the league with him, he'll be able to do different things and adapt his game.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for Oklahoma City because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is that way as well. And
they're a fun team. They're a fun team.
You don't get two young guys this good too often who are this complimentary. Like, there's nothing that one does would hold the other back. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's great team building, and I'm just fascinated to see how those two grow as they become even more and more, locked into the league and understand the league. They're going to be a team that people are going to be watching for years to come, for sure.
Chip, anything we haven't talked about Chet that interests you or you're looking at or you remember?
No, I mean, like I said, I'm glad Oklahoma City fans are getting to see him, see his personality, see his game, and appreciating how unique he is, because I think he is a unique talent. I think he's a unique person. We've seen this for a long time here, but to be able to see him do it on the biggest stage, it's not a surprise, but it's also, I think there's a lot of Minnesota pride when you see a Tyus Jones go and have great success, a Jalen Suggs, whoever from here, because I think if you talk to basketball players that come through here, they feel like Minnesota does not get the national recognition that it deserves as a basketball state, because it's minus 21 degrees here today.
Right.
It's a hockey state, but it is a big basketball hotbed with great talent here. And I think people more naturally are starting to see that the more you see Chets and Jalen's and guys that come out here and do well. But I just think he is such a unique talent, and I'm glad that he's having all the success he is, because he's a really unique guy, great character, and just a good dude.
Awesome. Chip, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. That's really good insight. I think people are fascinated with all things Chet, so it's kind of cool to give them a little bit of a backstory. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good to see you again, Brett.
Yeah. Thanks, Chip. Thank you guys for listening. We'll be back next week. If you like what you hear, if this is the first time you've heard the show or not, go jump on and subscribe. You can do that on my YouTube channel. You can do it through Sellout Crowd's YouTube channel. You could go to Apple or Spotify if you're an audio only listener. We'll be back next week. We thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.